Welcome one more day to Space and Harmonia. This piece of music you just listened to is something I composed a few days ago, having in mind how those who walk in the tissue of life connected to the universal master, attuned to the frequencies of that intelligence of life, must also go through many difficult situations, overcome many obstacles, suffer certain pain, and overcome all that as well. So I dedicate this piece of music to all those who walk consciously as members of the body of the Universal Master. And I do it as a reminder of our task, because we have to remember what's our true mission as members that wake up and somehow listen to the voice of the inner master, something for which we need tuning. This is the subject of today. We must be attuned to the universal head, whose manifestations was expressed on earth 2,000 years ago. He was called salvation by means of the divine birth, Iesou, Yeshua in other languages, Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic. The Greek expression Iesou was the contraction of Yeshua in Hebrew, which can also be contracted as Iesou in Hebrew and Aramaic. However, don't get stuck on names as people do, because being attuned doesn't mean to follow some external entity, but as I said, to be attuned inside and listen. Notice how I started with a very specific chord, which gives a sense of uncertainty, because here on earth we are living conditions of uncertainty. But I gradually move to more stable harmonias, not harmonies, because harmonia doesn't harm, remember that. We have to be very aware of how we use language and words as part of the true tuning. And the tuning of that piece of music was 432 Hz middle A, which is a more natural tuning than the one we find usually in most instruments, which are tuned to 440 Hz middle A. That's 2/10 to elevated. And when we calculate harmonias from the Hertz 1, attuning all the frequencies to the 1 vibration, then 432 is one of the tunings, one of the frequencies. Curiously, the geometric value of Tavel, which is the name of the true Earth, is also 432. That's very strange. Something that indicates we are being called to understand the frequencies of life, but not as some mathematical theory. It's more a feeling, an understanding, a way of living. So when we listen to the true master inside, then we are called to do something. We are called to live in a certain way, outside the roads of deception. And this is what we have to explore today. We have to remember this planet has been hijacked. As Master Iesou said, the assassin vine keepers took control of the vineyard of the Father. They killed some of the servants and even the Son. Now, Christians might think that Son was a man sacrificed 2,000 years ago, but he wasn't referring to himself as an external man. He was referring to the Son as the internal intelligence, which somehow is killed, even though that intelligence cannot be killed, but our connection can be severed. We very often cut off the cable of communication with this divine intelligence within. Not only because we ignore this divine intelligence of life exists within ourselves, but because we move to other activities that have nothing to do with what we have to do. We are distracted, mostly because of distorted beliefs. Many think this earth has been created by some benevolent God and that we have to follow His commandments and be good to be blessed and taken to heaven. And even with those beliefs, people keep transgressing the natural laws because of a lack of attunement, a lack of understanding. So I'll give you a brief overview of how my connection with the inner master evolved. Anyway, I will move inside because the sun is coming out and it might interfere with my eyes. So let's see. Now, the connection with the true inner master began in me when I was a child. I have explained in another occasion how in the year 87, approximately, when I was about 5 years old, I lived a situation in which a girl was pulling my hair violently, and instead of reacting negatively, I relaxed. Something in me took command, so to say. It was a presence, a greater intelligence, full of compassion and patience. And I understood I had to wait until this girl let me free, which she did eventually, but I didn't do anything to her. I didn't understand why she was so violent with me, but I didn't care either. And over the years, many years later, actually, I realized that wasn't normal. That attitude was not usual in a 5-year-old, especially when kids are somehow reactive, as I was sometimes. So I began to realize some profound connection was established when I was a kid, and obviously that evolved. I grew up in a Catholic family. All my family members were Catholic, and somehow my relation with the divine was standard, so to say. I would pray to God. I used to ask for help to pass exams, to get cured from twist ankles and things like that. I even went through miraculous experiences. And I used to keep dialogues, inner dialogues, with this divine intelligence, even though I wasn't replied with words. But I began to become familiar with the language of silence. I knew there was a greater intelligence. And obviously, I was understanding that through the framework of Christianity, Catholic Christianity. For me, Jesus was an external expression of that God. So I listened to his words, and I didn't consider Jesus to be separate from that God somehow. But my understanding was very different to that of Christians in general. I never thought of Jesus as a son sent by a father to be sacrificed and pay for the sins of people, as religious believers think. I was not aware of that idea consciously. I had heard about it, but it didn't resonate with me. Decades later, I realized that's a savage belief present in many ancient cultures where people sacrifice animals and other people, other humans, to atone for the transgressions of someone or demand the favor of some god. So obviously Christians inherited that savage belief without understanding the true teaching of the so-called Messiah. Now I see that was because Paul said certain things. He said the Messiah had atoned for the sins of the world, and he mentioned the cross, so people associated his words with what took place. But as the book of Revelation says, Apocalypse 13:8, the Lamb was sacrificed before the fall of the cosmos. So that sacrifice had nothing to do with a carnal man sacrificed 2,000 years ago. No, it's an essence that is sacrificed because it comes to a world which is fragmented. So life became fragmented as well. The collective body of the universal Son, if you wish, the universal emanation from the source, the primordial Father, became somehow disconnected and started to go through suffering because of certain modifications and mistakes performed by fallen architects, Elohim, as they are called in Scripture. And many people are not aware of this. And this is why things are so confusing, why people keep dying, keep getting sick, without experiencing the aliveness that emerges when we become really aware of the divine life within ourselves, connected, attuned to the primordial intelligence. And I was not aware of this either when I was a kid, but my understanding evolved. When I was about 12 years old, I became a fan of Caballo de Troya, the Trojan horse, which is a very famous series of books that were written by J.J. Benítez. It was a bestseller all over the world. I'm sure that there is an English version as well. And this sort of work claims to be real, to be the account of an expedition to the past performed by the US Army in collaboration with other forces. And supposedly they got into contact with Jesus and the apostles. And it's a fascinating story. They are thick books. Even though the author admitted that the book has several sources, the information in the book has several sources, and one of them is the Urantia book. And even though I was not aware of some of the sources of the book, I eventually became more interested in deep teachings from the East and the West. So I eventually became more familiar with an esoteric understanding of Christianity. I began to explore the so-called inner Christianity or esoteric Christianity in the line of Georg Ivanovich Gurdjieff, even though he later on went further and he somehow said that we have to stop considering ourselves to be Jews, Christians, an idea which came from Paul actually, because Paul said that in true Messiah there is neither Greek nor Jew. So by the same reasoning, there is neither Catholic nor Jew nor Buddhist nor Hinduist. That's the true universal teaching. Catholicos means universal in Greek. But Christians don't seem to understand this, especially those who say there is only salvation in Jesus, without understanding that no external figure, even if it's divine, can save us. Only walking, feeling, and thinking like the Master can save us. That is, becoming active members of the body of the Messiah, if you will. I don't like the word Messiah because it contains the word mess. In Hebrew it would be Mashiach, which means there is understanding. So we have to understand, not just have wisdom ideas. And I wasn't aware of this at the age of 18, 17, which is when I started to study esoteric Christianity, inner Christianity. But my relation with the inner master began somehow, because I realized there is really a deep intelligence of consciousness and conscience which wants to establish a deeper relation with ourselves. That became very clear to me, and realized how consciousness is perception awareness, but it's not always harmonized, it's not always in tune with the universal head, so to say. Whereas conscience, it's already the integration of our awareness and our feelings into the alive reality, where our human experience is somehow elevated, and where we know what to do, who we are. It's an instantaneous knowing, elevated knowing, Da'at Elyon in Hebrew, which is between wisdom and understanding, Chokmah and Binah. And that conscience is part of the Son. Now, having already a rather clear idea of the qualities that belong to the Master within myself, I began to self-study very deeply. I eventually got involved with study groups. I worked with many people in different countries, Ireland, France. I got into contact with many other seekers and workers, keeping an exchange with them, even via email. And this helped me to get out of situations of confusion that I experienced when I was a teenager and later on. And obviously this was very important in my journey of inner discovery. But there was something missing. For many years I still regarded myself as someone who was asleep most of the time, someone that was disconnected, that was not divine, even though I knew my deeper self or higher self was divine, but I was not aware of all the richness of this inner relation. In part because of the Christian beliefs that I had. In Christianity, you regard yourself as a sinner, separate from God. And even when you deal with mysticism or spirituality, such as inner Christianity or the fourth way, as some call it, you still regard yourself as a machine, a robot. You still think there is a great need for an external teacher, when in reality the inner attunement should bring what we need. But we have to trust that inner master and understand the teaching without demanding external conditions. Obviously, when we walk in the master, what we need externally comes. And for me, it was so in many situations, but as I said, I didn't understand very much that my life was already part of the divine, and I'm called to bring the truth, understand the truth. At that time, I became aware of certain contradictions. I remember that in Ireland I opened a blog called themusicofwisdom.blogspot.com, Song of Reality. You have it in the box of information. And my first article was about the note of being. So I was already aware of the need for attunement, inner attunement. And I also wrote about certain modifications that had been performed in humanity, genetic modifications. However, I didn't understand very much who were those hijacking the vineyard of the Father, who were those who somehow influenced in humanity, and why the architects don't do anything. I thought the architects allowed humanity to evolve, overcoming difficult situations, so I accepted it. And it's true that at that time in Ireland, I already had the idea of bringing the truth to some extent to help others connect with the inner master. But I was so full of traumas inside, so confused about certain things, that my connection with the master was not constant. Sometimes I even had to ask for help, which I received. And it took me many years to repair certain disconnections. Even though I was involved with certain groups of inner work over there, there was something which was not being expressed through me. Somehow I was considering myself to be nothingness, because that's part of the inner Christianity, or the fourth way. You regard yourself as nothingness when the master says you are everything. So there is a contradiction. You are everything because your true life is part of the Holy One, and that's wholeness. Obviously you have to be humble, but that humbleness is not regarding yourself as nothing, but as everything. You have everything inside. This is what I didn't understand at the time. That's why I experienced self-pity, self-compassion, and remorse, obviously, because of my deviations from the path of life. I didn't understand very much that waking up implies fulfilling our true destiny right now. It's not something in the future. I was aware there is a destiny for each one, but I thought the ground for that destiny had to be prepared to be fulfilling some future. But the true destiny begins right now, as I said in other occasions. It's the works that were prepared beforehand by the Holy One to be expressed on earth, and this is right now. This is living the connection, the attunement with the Holy One, something for which we need true wisdom and true understanding in conscience. As members of the universal body of the Mashiach, the true divine understanding, the Master of Life, whose essence obviously was manifested 2000 years ago through a man, because the Father was living through him. The light of the Father, that Holy Spirit, was living fully through the man called Yeshua, Iesou. And as he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, the way. So you have to walk as I walk. I am the truth, because he has the true understanding. And the life. The life is not just what we see, but an essence that comes from the original source of everything that has life. This tree, my body, the plants, have life. But here, this life is somehow disconnected. This is why life experiences processes of death, pain, suffering. So the true mission is to reconnect everything to the tree of life, the original reality. And this is why we have to be attuned to that holy vibration within ourselves right now, listening to the truth, understanding why things become so difficult, why we get lost. Actually, in spite of studying the most important spiritualities and getting involved with inner work, working with others, I lost my connection, my dialogue with the inner master around the year 2014, because I didn't know what to do in life. Suddenly I was disconnected from my true destiny because I didn't understand something I said already in a group, which is that we need to assume responsibility. And I remember that the teacher in that group said it has nothing to do with responsibility. I don't know how he said that, because it's all about responsibility. We have to assume that there is something holy in us and it must grow. And once we become aware of our connection to the head, then we are somehow responsible, because we have to respond consciously, maturely, to everything that happens. We assume that we are not here by chance, that we are not an accident, that we are not victims, that we are not sinners or automatons, robots. We are part of the holy tissue of life, and therefore we have to act and live as such. Assume that we have been given everything, not just all the unconditional love from the Father, but all the vitality, all the access to true conscience in pure serenity, having the ability to influence everything around us and attract the conditions that will help us grow as members of that holy body of life. That's the key, which I didn't understand fully in those years, and that's why I got very sick. I already explained many times how I went through a health crisis, experiencing systemic inflammation in many organs, allergies to most foods, and all sorts of skin problems. And it took me a few years to realize what was going on. I even had to study in an institute, a form of psychotherapy that uses Hebrew wisdom, and that helped. The tools used by Hebrew wisdom can be insightful. We realize the origin of certain diseases and ailments, but obviously those are just tools. The communication I'm talking about is very different. It's not just a question of applying some method or technique. And very recently, having an inner exchange with the inner master, listening to his silent intuitions, I asked why you said that you came to fulfill the law of the prophets and not to cancel it, if it's full of accusations and punishment, and that has nothing to do with mercy or love. And then I received an immediate answer, intuitive answer, and it's that when we walk in the true master, all the transgressions are cancelled, so even the laws of this world cannot judge us, because we fulfill them. So the divine intelligences that control this world, the ruler of this world, cannot accuse us when we walk in the true master of life. That's the true payment. The payment is not a man sacrificed 2,000 years ago, but the way you walk, the way you think, and the way you live, with true unconditional love, true life, true conscience. That's the true payment. Somehow we fulfill the laws of this world, but because we express higher principles of true life. And we have already seen some of those principles. The following day, we'll probably explore the principle of mirroring, how ourselves are mirrored outside in the way we perceive and sense. Others can be our mentors. We can learn from everything, even trees. And We have to be very attuned to the intelligence of the Master in order to learn properly. So for now, thank you very much for listening with attention. Down below you have the links to the blog, the web. And until the next day, let's keep opening the heart for the manifestation of true unconditional love and modified life, integral conscience and deep, blissful serenity.